Chamber is a sponsor, and then AT&T is our main sponsor. And Lane Lanninger from AT&T is with us this morning. So Lane, do you want to stand up so people can recognize you? Do you want to say anything? Or?
Oh, no, just I'm Lane Lanninger with AT&T Kansas. I'm happy to be here to support the community of Ottawa, now the Chamber, and sponsor events like this to find out what's going on during legislative session. And you didn't get up this morning to hear me talk. So.
Okay. Well, we thank you for your sponsorship and participation in an important community partner here. Sponsorship of this, and today the refreshments are provided by the Republicans. So thank the Republicans for all the food back there. The coffee is always provided by the library in the city of Ottawa. So make sure you get a warm cup of coffee and something to eat. I think there's good choices of food, and Sarah Kaler is going to this morning, and thank you for taking time out of your weekend to come and share with us about the legislative session. So with that being said, each legislator a chance to maybe briefly introduce yourself and just give us your impression of what the 2020 session is going to shape up to be, just a general overall impression.
You want me? Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to see you. Can you hear me? Oh, great. Some familiar faces in the room. Unusual faces, too. You know, it's going to be an interesting session. I say this every year, but each session has its own personality, and this one is exactly shaping up to have its own personality. There's a couple of things. We've got major issues going on. We've got actually any topic you can think of. We've got bills that are being introduced or that we're working on. One of the main things this year is it is an election year, but by our state constitution, we are supposed to finish within 90 days, which is interesting because in the Senate we have one of our leaders running for U.S. seat, so I think they want to finish in 45 days. But it's just the way it goes. One of the main topics that I'm working on this year is property tax. I did a deep dive this summer with several people. Several legislators went around the state, tried to find solutions that allowed local control while reining in our out-of-control tax increases. And if you look, on average, Kansas has had about 180% property tax increase over the last 20 years. That's statewide. Each area is a little bit different. So what we're looking at is transparency in taxation and truth in taxation. So when your valuations go up, you don't get an automatic property tax increase. That the locals will have the opportunity to vote on it and to vote publicly. And I don't think that's much to ask for the way our system works, is truth in taxation and transparency. So we're working on that legislation, and hopefully we can get it to the House quickly. You've heard the pro-life, the ruling from the state Supreme Court. That is so controversial. I've never seen this in my 8 years in the Senate and 2 years in the House. What they did was joint meetings, introduced a resolution or a bill on each side of the chamber, and had a joint meeting on it. And within the first week of legislation, that those resolutions have been passed out of both chambers, the House and the Senate. So they're both sitting below the line, ready to go above the line. And the rumor is we may see them next week. So that is the quickest I've ever seen any legislation passed. It is important. We've talked about that last year. I know you remember, but just to refresh, the court, we have a rogue court, and they took our state constitution and said that you have the right to abortion on the words life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So all this resolution would do is allow you the opportunity to vote to decide whether you want the legislature to decide whether the state has abortion or not, or whether the court should decide. I think that's a pretty simple, straightforward situation. I know we've got a lot to talk about. I could keep going, but I want to hear from these guys, and I want to hear from you. I want to hear what your questions are. So don't hesitate to reach out during the session or today. I appreciate you guys, and thanks again for being here.
Follow your lead. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out. It's nice to actually not drive to Topeka in the snow and ice, which has kind of been the order of the session so far. This session has probably felt like one of the fastest starts we've had in a long time. There's a lot of people walking around the building who have been through several sessions, maybe even more than me, and they say, wow, this is one of the fastest starts we've had. So a lot of issues. Of course, we started under the cloud of the judicial pay lawsuit. Got good news this week that had been dismissed. That allows us to have good communications with the judicial branch and begin to have conversations about their budget and what needs they have. The life amendment has been huge. We've been working hard on that. It's a very important issue this session. It needs 2/3 votes in both houses, so 84 and 27. There are 84 Republicans in the House. We got word this week that the governor was threatening any Democrat who voted for it with a primary. And we do have some folks on the other side of the aisle who, as a matter of conscience, believe in the life issue and want to vote for it. And they're being told that if they do that, they'll get a primary. So that's discouraging. But I do see both the House and Senate working on this issue and trying to get a quick resolution to put this in front of the voters. And that's the way our system works. If we believe that the court's made a bad decision, we put it to the people and let them decide in the form of a constitutional amendment. That's how it should be. And we'll be working to get that in front of the public so you all can make the decision on whether Kansas is a pro-life state or pro-choice state. And we believe it's a pro-life state and think the voters will bear that out. Medicaid expansion has been big. Large press conference with the Senate Majority Leader and the Governor on their compromise with 22 senators that have signed on to that bill. Hearings started this week. We'll see how, I think we've got 3 more days of hearings next week on that, Karen. So, and then we'll see if they work the bill and see what happens to it. Funny article came out this week, said House leadership was holding Medicaid expansion hostage, and we had to inform the media that the hostage is actually across the building in the Senate at this point. So it's a little difficult for us to do when the Senate has the ball on that, and we'll make those decisions. Some interesting developments, too, that just came out this week, that the federal government's looking at changing Medicaid possibly to a block grant to the states. If that happens, that really changes, even for the 36 or so states that have expanded, how to deal with Medicaid expansion. CAPERS refinancing is back. We thought that was dead last year. We thought we made it pretty clear on a bipartisan basis that the governor's plan to refinance the state's pension system was a non-starter. She's brought it back, adding another $4.4 billion in spending and saddling our children and grandchildren with more debt and leaving our pension system less solvent than it is today. Budget's going to be a big one. The governor's put out her budget. It's working its way through the subcommittees. We're going to have to make some decisions there. The regions have asked for quite a bit more money to try to keep tuition down. The governor has given them almost no increase. It's pretty bare bones budget, and she's kind of daring the legislature to add spending to it in order to meet some of those needs that we're seeing crop up from some of our agencies. We've got executive reorganization orders. Those are where the governor says, I want to change around these cabinet level agencies and do something different. One to combine DCF, KDADS, and juvenile justice under one giant human services agency. There are some real concerns about that. We can unpack those this morning. And then taxes. Whether it's food sales tax reduction, which we passed a couple of times last year, whether it's decoupling from the federal system so that you can make maximum use of your deductions here in Kansas. The governor has proposed a digital downloads tax that would tax your Netflix and streaming accounts. And of course, property tax is big on the Senate side, and we've got a little income tax issue that we brought up this week on the House side that we think is going to be favorable. So we've got a lot to talk about and look forward to your questions this morning. So thanks for being here.
Morning, everybody. Thank you for having us. Thank you to our sponsors. Lane is one of our best lobbyists over in Topeka, so I always appreciate his efforts. Thank you to our Republican caucus who's brought the snacks this morning. And then I also want to give a shout out to Greg Mast in the Ottawa Herald. He always does an excellent job for us here locally. I hope you're able to catch, he's got a new article out. Today is Mike Doug Day, one of our local Franklin County residents. He will be suiting up for the first time ever for a basketball game tonight for the Ottawa University Braves. They're nationally ranked, they're fun to watch. So if you can get out there at 5 p.m. tonight to support him, we're packing the house for him. Great young man. He has an oxygen tank that he's been using. His motto, his hashtag was one breath at a time. So that's a pretty inspiring story, outstanding young man. So wanted to give him a shout out for Mike Doug Day. Michael Douglas is his name. I'll try not to mention too much, but one of the things I've heard over and over is property tax relief. So I appreciate Senator Tyson's good work and efforts on that, and look forward to getting something done on that this session. Another important one, I won't rehash on the constitutional amendment or Medicaid expansion, but perhaps just as controversial, anybody from Central Heights here this morning, Mrs. Lichtig, one of our best teachers there at Central Heights, her students gave a presentation last year. It's now been getting statewide attention in both the Kansas City Star and Wichita Eagle. They want to make the state fruit the watermelon. So that's been getting a lot of media coverage and attention. So that's one of the bills we've introduced and is sitting in with the other issues in our State and Federal Affairs Committee over in Topeka. They actually have a very impressive presentation, though, for any of you up for watching 3rd and 4th graders present on why the watermelon should be the state fruit. Kidding aside, I'm very excited. We have a bipartisan bill. We have 15 Republican sponsors, 10 Democratic sponsors, and many other very interested in mental health legislation. It's to try to bring about mental health parity and insurance coverage. It's named in honor of Christy Bennett, and her family's been doing tremendous work out of this area. So we have that bill introduced on both the Senate and the House, and the hope is, again, that we can bring mental health parity with coverage issues and let doctors decide what medical coverage is needed rather than the insurance companies. And then I'll mention a couple of interesting bills. You may be familiar with this statewide smoking ban that came in about a decade ago. The Attorney General's introduced legislation on that, asking us to consider whether vaping should also be added to that ban. That will be coming through our Judiciary Committee. We had a lot of work on bullying that you may recall last year in our schools. We've got an update on that. It's reported that about 60% of our students witness that type of behavior in the schools, and then another 20% are affected by it, but that's causing some of the mental health issues we've been trying to deal with in our schools. Our State Board of Education is taking action on that, but also in our House Education Committee, we're staying on top of it and considering whether additional action is needed there. And then the last one I will mention is another bill that Derek Schmidt, our Attorney General, he does an excellent job. He's introduced another bill. We've seen an increase with local governments suing various entities. That has the impact of there's a lack of coordination, and it makes it difficult for our state on behalf of the people to try to get those things resolved and work to maximize settlements for the people. So he's introduced legislation for us to consider whether that should be coordinated through his office, or if local governments are allowed to pursue claims on behalf of their citizens locally, whether that should be with his approval or under good cause requirements or things of that nature. So that's another bill that will be coming through. But with that, I look forward to taking questions. And I do want to say, still as the rookie member over there, I appreciate the leadership of both of these two, because we're blessed to have them both. They're two of the best over in Topeka to work with. So appreciate their leadership. And again, I can't plug enough for Mike Douglas today if you get the chance to be there at Ottawa University tonight.
Well, I should have started out by thanking all three of you for your service, and I don't know if I failed to do that, but we really do appreciate the work that you put in Topeka. It's 90 days, which really is 4.5 to 5 months out of your lives, and realize the sacrifices you make for family and profession just to do that. So thank you for your representing our causes in Topeka at the state legislature. And I should have mentioned too that I'm up here today because Richard Jackson had a health issue and was unable to make it, and so we want to keep Richard in our prayers. I think things are fine, but still he was unable and he is hospitalized, so we just need to remember Richard going forward. And I thought I would, and then I also want to thank the City of Ottawa who videotaped this on Facebook, and so when you see how many people are in the room, we know way more people actually access and view this every time. from the analytics. So it's way bigger than just who's in the room here this morning, and we thank them for doing that and making this all available to all the people in the city of Ottawa and Franklin County. So we're very honored. I always introduce Blaine as Representative Finch, but he's actually Speaker Pro Tem Finch, and it's a great honor and privilege to have a local person serving in leadership. It's just good for our community, and he has the ability to influence legislation, and he's done that this week. He introduced a proposal that's called Make Kansas Work. It came out from all the leadership in the Kansas House. And I was particularly interested and wondered if you would start out this morning by commenting on your Rural Protection for Rural Hospitals and the Hospital Innovation Fund and how that compares to Medicaid expansion.
Sure, be glad to. Everybody should have one of these. This is kind of the one sheet on the Make Kansas Work plan. This is a plan put out by House leadership this week to address a lot of areas. There's kind of a general feeling from people sometimes that Kansas isn't working for them or their kids. Kids are moving away, they're leaving the state. We see questions of whether our institutions are sustainable in rural areas. Can we continue to have health care? Can we continue to attract young people here? Can we continue to provide the workforce that businesses need to locate or expand in our state? And so this is a plan to try to address those areas. And specifically on the Rural Healthcare Innovation Fund, the state would put up $10 million one time. It's subject to a 1-to-2 match from private health foundations, corporations, or individuals who have an interest in rural health care, up to $20 million in their contributions for a total of a $30 million fund. The Kansas Department of Health and Environment would oversee the fund, and they would grant to Kansas counties, after an application, funds out of that account in order to study health care in their communities. We saw Fort Scott Hospital close. We saw it reopen in a different configuration. It turns out that what they really needed was to right-size health care in their community. They had a hospital that was built for a population that wasn't there anymore and that sought out services in a different way than when that hospital was built. What they needed was fewer beds, a clinic, and an emergency room, and other actors outside of the community stepped in and brought those things. What this fund would do is allow communities to study the issue, figure out what they need, how they need to get it, and do it without having to go through the trauma of having their hospital close and potentially go without health care for a time in their communities. So we think it's a great option. We allow for the study of telemedicine and infrastructure. It allows for the attraction of a resident. If a community says, hey, we don't have a good family practice practitioner here, or we really need this type of specialty in our community, we need to try to get an oncologist here, or we need to have a better link between our small community and the bigger regional center that's maybe 2 or 3 counties away. It gives them an opportunity to do that and kind of choose their own destiny instead of waiting for something to close or someone to go out of business and then having to try to scramble to reconfigure. So we're really excited about that. And I want to note that the 5 largest counties in the state are excluded from this program. Johnson, Wyandotte, Douglas, Shawnee, and Sedgwick are not eligible to apply for these grants. They will get over 65% of Medicaid expansion money if Kansas expands Medicaid. Rural hospitals will be scrambling for the rest. And you recall that the Senate plan taxes hospitals to pay for Medicaid expansion. So many small hospitals will get very little money from Medicaid expansion and then have to pay taxes in order to fund the rest of the plan. We think that's a raw deal for rural hospitals, and we can do better. And so this plan is designed to pick up that slack and fill that void and take care of our rural communities and let them kind of choose their own destiny when it comes to health care.
Does anybody have any questions for Representative Finch on this topic specifically about this program within the Make Kansas Work about the Rural Hospital Fund?
My question is... Wait just one second, Roxy. We're going to start right here, and then we'll go to you. Yep, come on up. Stand up for me. Oh.
I guess my question is, if a hospital in a county that's associated with a larger hospital, such as Advent, Ottawa, they're in Franklin County, but they're associated with Johnson County, do they qualify?
Yeah, it doesn't prohibit affiliated hospitals, and what the KU Health System has been doing across the northern tier of Kansas counties is affiliating with a number of very small, very rural hospitals. Advent Health System's doing that, Olathe Med's doing that. The idea would be not to exclude them from being able to apply, but the funds are not to be used to go back to Johnson County or Wyandotte County to help with operations there or studies there. It's designed, so, and this is why it has to run through the county commission. The application itself has to specify what the aid's being used for. They have to file a report annually describing the accountability measures and what the aid went for, and then KDHE has to report to the legislature annually on all of the grants and what they've been used for. So a hospital with an outpost or with a merged facility in a small county can apply, but the money has to be used there to examine healthcare in that county, not where the larger corporate parent might be.
So I think you may have already answered the question, but, so the funds are strictly to study. They can't be, they're not going to be used to help provide any
It does.
answers.
Well, no,
Or
that's
any
not true. No, that's not true at all. That's the solution. If Fort Scott had known ahead of time that they had too many beds and that they could right size, that is the answer. This is designed to get the community to the answer. It does include the line for infrastructure. So if a community says, hey, we have a telemedicine issue, and if we had better broadband, we could be more active in telemedicine, then this does allow for some of that to be used that way. Not to build a new building, not to, $30 million would go fairly quickly if we were allowing people to build hospitals. But
So it helps with some parts of the solution.
it does. It helps to identify some of that and figure out what needs to happen next. And if the fund's successful, we can certainly continue this concept of a public-private match even further.
Senator Tyson, do you want to comment on this, or Medicaid expansion?
I would love to. I appreciate the efforts and the, what leadership has brought forward for us. I love it that we're looking for solutions. I will comment a little bit on Fort Scott, though. Their population has been rather stagnant. They have lost some, but not much. What happened with that facility is the locals weren't using the hospital. You've heard the term shop local. Well, it's the same with your hospital and your medical, too. If you don't stay local, you're going to lose it. And Fort Scott actually had a business that was paying their employees to go to different hospitals, to go to Joplin or Via Christi, because of the price with the Fort Scott Hospital. So with that scenario going on, it was just a matter of time before the hospital was going to run into problems. We've had a couple of hospitals close, and Dr. Epley, he serves in the House. I've had the opportunity to visit with him. He went and looked at the books on the hospitals that closed. They were, of course, owned by out-of-state companies, which was true with Mercy in Fort Scott. They were in the black. It just wasn't enough in the black to make their corporations or their businesses happy. So another issue that I see is that if we can keep these locally owned within our community, that also helps the community. But we need to support our local facilities, shop local. I know I've seen a lot of you in the store and you act surprised, but we're local. The grocery stores that we have are, you know, in this community and in other areas. I was going to touch real quick, though, on Lane, since Representative Samsel called him out. Lane was my first intern, and he's had a wonderful career. We're glad to have him, but also, just so you know, Michael Douglas is Lane's cousin that will be playing tonight. So it's a small world, and I just love Kansas, and that's one of the reasons. There's always a connection. So, but thank you for the leadership in the House and taking lead point on this.
Representative Sampson, would you like to add any comments?
Just very briefly, I appreciate leadership's role in moving these plans forward, and I look forward to learning more and getting these. They are going to be individual bills, so we'll get to work these one at a time, which I also appreciate. I also noticed we have Judy Davis-Cole with us. I forgot to mention her as well. She's one of our good advocates for AARP over in Topeka, so she keeps me well educated on those issues as well. So thank you for being here this morning.
George is here, too.
Oh, George? Where's George hiding?
Yeah, we're going to, George, so this is working. Where's that go? Oh, there, it's on, good. So thank you for being kind to us today, because we are kind of pinch hitting at the last moment. So my question is to Senator Tyson, and it's regarding your truth in taxation bill.
Sure.
This bill appears to be targeted to have an effect on budgeting on school districts, cities, counties. We'd like for you to tell us more about Senate Bill 294, and then furthermore, what is your plan to assure voters that you are making sure that you're accountable under the dome for the same exact deadline or guidelines?
Yeah, I'm absolutely accountable. Every vote that I cast is public, online. I encourage you to go out and look at it. In fact, We've increased transparency to the point where all committee meetings are online and can be heard, and our session now is video. So kslegislature.org. You can go out to the website and check it all out and keep track of our votes, keep track of what we're doing. I think that's wonderful. That's exactly what we need. And it's not just transparency with those in the building. Because of the audio and video availability, we've made it transparent throughout the state and nation if people want to watch. What the transparency bill does, it's Senate Bill 294. There's two bills out there. Well, there's more than two, but the two major ones is Senate Bill 294 and 295. 295, what it does is, and you guys know this, you're a homeowner or a property owner, and you're just doing general maintenance on your home. You know, you may need to paint it, you may need to put a new roof on because of a storm that came through. That shouldn't raise the valuation of your property. It can and does at times now. So we just want clarification that for normal maintenance, it will not raise the valuation of your property. This would encourage people to take care of their property instead of letting it go and trying to get their property tax decreased as a result of that. The other thing is, the other bill is Senate Bill 294, and what it does is we based it off of Utah and Tennessee, so it's a working model. In fact, Utah's had it in place for several years. We're going to have a former Senate President of Utah come and testify in committee and let us know how it works. And what it does is, if the valuation increases, then the mill levy is automatically recalculated so that you bring in the same dollar amount as the previous year. Then if the locals would like to increase that and bring in more money, the public is notified, and the part of the notification includes the meeting when they'll be voting on it. So you'll know the time and location when you're voting on it. It doesn't impact the budget process at all. In fact, if you want to vote on the budget at the same time that you vote on the mill levy change, the locals are more than welcome to. It's just promoting transparency, because I've been sitting in meetings, and I'm sure you guys have too, where a county commissioner might say, I didn't raise your taxes. And we're like, we wrote a bigger check. And he says, well, Topeka did that. Well, what does that mean? Topeka did that. The legislature did that. PVD did that. Who did that? And so this is just putting that transparency and that ownership. If locals want to take in more money on property tax, that's fine. Hopefully what the goal is if we can get this implemented, then we can remove the tax lid, which many complain about, and which has, I think, had unintended consequences where we get these increases almost every year, no matter what, because they don't want to face an election. So this would literally turn it back to local control, which is, I think, a win for everybody, and transparency. That's all it's asking for.
So we're going to ask for questions on taxation, and also allow Representative Finch and Samsel to comment, and then we're going to open it up for your questions. So does anybody have any questions specifically on the taxation issue that Senator Tyson has proposed and is in the Kansas Senate right now? Representative Samsel, would you like to comment on this, or property tax, or any taxation issue that you see in the session this time?
Just briefly, I'll mention that being in the communities and going door to door, property tax was the #1 issue that I heard about over and over, especially for seniors and others who were wanting to help stay in their homes, either don't have incomes anymore or certainly not rising incomes, and yet property taxes we've seen rising. So I appreciate the ideas and discussions and moving forward throughout this session to see what we can do to get property taxes down. A number of conversations in households across my district, some of them fairly tearful actually, where you're getting down to, can we pay the property taxes, prescription medicines, utilities, and those were things that were really day-to-day pocketbook issues. And so that's really, I'm glad to have the focus on that this session. And I forgot to mention earlier in the outset, but one issue among, we've got a lot of controversial hot button issues there, but one of them I'm glad we don't have is the word education funding has really not come up this session. So it's nice to have that one behind us. We're not litigating that in court anymore. Now there is an at-risk component component that we're coming down the pipe, but not the same level, at least in my experience, that what we've had for the last session and the years prior to that. But the property tax issue, I'm glad to have a focus on that.
I was on a panel for county and city leaders this week. They had their conference in Topeka, and their staffs actually seem pretty excited about the idea of this Utah model as maybe a substitute for the tax lid. We haven't seen it in the House yet. Want to see if it comes over and what form it comes over. I think that the trick with property taxes is the timing of when municipalities have to set their budgets, and if you're going to put an election requirement potentially in there, what that does to that timing. So that's all got to be workable, and it sounds like Utah at least has figured out a way to do that. And so based on the response I heard, there's some excitement around this possibility. I think everybody would like to see property taxes lower. Everybody, whether you write that check, whether it's escrowed with your mortgage, there's a feeling that it's going up. And I think it's a system that for many people is so complex it's hard to understand exactly what changed year to year. Did it go up because the mill levy changed? Did it go up because my valuation changed? Did it go up because of something the county did or the school district did or the city did? It's a very difficult system for the average person to understand why it is that their taxes are going up, but they all seem to understand that, yes, they continue to go up year after year. And so I think finding ways to kind of cut through that murk and provide transparency is important. I think our local leaders, at least the ones I know in the city and county and school district, try to be cognizant of that and want to do right by their constituents, just like those of us in Topeka do. But it is an issue we hear a lot about when we go door to door, when we talk to people. It's something that's very much on people's minds. And so to the extent there may be a better mousetrap out there to deal with it, then I'm all for looking at it.
So now we want our representatives to hear what's on your mind. So does anybody have any questions? And Sarah will have the microphone for you to speak. Please stand up and speak into the microphone.
Yes, and if you could introduce yourself when you do ask your question. I forgot. I think John and I are kind of we're not practiced yet. So it's the first one of the year. So tell us who you are and your question.
I'm Diana Starr-Sinigdine. My question actually goes back to the rural hospital effort. I don't know enough about it, but so my question here is, if a hospital downsizes or reduces what they offer in order to be the correct size for a community, does it affect their ability to be eligible for the Medicaid they're already eligible for, not expansion, but I know that there are rules and requirements from the federal government for that.
So there are. The intention is not to have any community disqualify itself. Medicaid money follows patients. And so that would continue to do that. If the hospital has 12 beds and they really only need 6, absent changing a critical access designation, which affects whether they have to pay for the state privilege fee, essentially the state tax on hospitals. The idea is not to have them change any of those designations or disqualify. And if legislators still want to pass Medicaid expansion, this does not preclude that. This does not compete with that. We've talked before about the reasons why I don't support Medicaid expansion, but this is not meant to compete with that or make hospitals choose this or that. This is really a targeted, focused solution for rural hospitals because it's not something that Medicaid expansion is really good at.
I would stand if I was able, thank you.
We see you, Paul.
Okay. My question goes to utilities. Mark mentioned something about utilities a moment ago, and I just recognized yesterday that the two major providers of electrical energy in the state within the last couple of years have merged. And it appears that there's a hedge fund in New York that's going to be pressuring these two entities, or this now one entity, to the tune of some $760 million, as I understand it. And basically what it boils down to is they say that these two entities, or Evergy, is not providing a large enough profit margin and return to the investor. And so it's suggested that they'll be cutting back on maintenance and their rates may be going up. Is there any way that the legislature can impact that, perhaps prevent it from happening? I pay enough for utilities as it is. I'd rather not pay more. And I don't know if there's a regulatory agency in the state now that looks into that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Can you help me there?
Yeah, there is a regulatory, Kansas Corporation Commission. Also, there was a utility study, and we will be getting the results of that anytime, probably within, if it wasn't presented to the committee last week, we'll see it this week. So it is an issue. Utilities is an issue. Part of what happened, and most people may not realize, we had a renewable energy mandate in Kansas a few years ago that required us to go up to 20%. And when we did that, it sounds great and wonderful, but like our coal plants and our other plants, especially the coal, they ramp up and then they have to decrease or shut down when the wind comes up, because wind doesn't blow constantly. So there's this up and down that we've created in the system for our existing plants to compensate for the wind. And inadvertently, it had ended up increasing some of the rates. We've got a lot of controversy. I know Franklin County has had meetings on wind energy. I know Anderson County has set a resolution forward. They've set parameters. Lynn County, they were actually going to put it on the ballot in November because some people have signed contracts. Bourbon County, they have no zoning whatsoever for these wind companies to come in. And I don't know if you've heard what's gone on in Allen, but that is something that needs to be addressed, I think, at the state level, so that we don't have a bad player come in and take advantage of our locals. We've got liens on property now. We've got family pitted against family and friends against friends because of a bad player with the wind energy in Allen County. That's not to say all companies are that way, but we did have a bad situation there. So I'd hate to see that happen anywhere else in the state. As far as utility prices, they are high, but they would have to go to the Kansas Corporation Commission in order to get another increase. Not saying it couldn't happen, but it could.
The KCC took a pretty dim view of the last increase that was proposed, and I think they would again. The utility rate study shows a couple of things from the preview that we've seen so far. Kansas has, for IOUs, investor-owned utilities, Evergy, our Kansas rates are higher than the states around us. A number of reasons that is and could be, and the utilities will tell you it's because we are slightly ahead of our neighbors in terms of the increased capital cost to make our plants compliant with EPA mandates. Think about the plant down here at Lacine that they shut down and they put the scrubbers in, and they had to comply with some federal EPA requirements on clean energy for that plant. That is a huge capital expense, and the way investor-owned utilities get their money is they spend all that money and build a power plant or renovate a power plant, and then they ask for a rate increase to cover that, and it goes out like this as they're paying down that debt. Then you get to the end of that useful life of that plant, or a change needs to be made, and they do the same process again, and that's why rates just tend to stair-step up over time as they do that. They do have to get approval from the KCC each time to do that. What we did find is that municipal energy companies tend to provide a better value in Kansas than the IOUs at this point. So that's kind of an interesting dichotomy in the study. But you're right, Paul, that if a hedge fund is telling them they're not profitable enough, then their solution, because it's unlikely that they get another rate increase right now, their solution is that they cut back on things like deferred maintenance and operating costs to try to stay within that rate structure they have and show more return for the investors. And that's dangerous for Kansas consumers, because as we fall further behind, the grid is not in good shape, the plants don't produce at an efficient level, and we lose out on the uninterruptible power that people depend on for businesses and homes.
Yeah, and if I may, that maintenance also includes security too, and that's not something we want to decrease at this point.
Yeah, I'd just briefly add that I do sit on our energy committee. We did just receive the report. It's over 300 pages long, so I haven't had a chance to study it yet. But consistent with what Representative Finch just explained, their explanation is they believe that infrastructure essentially that we've made investments in that our neighboring states haven't done yet, which is why our rates have been higher, but they expect those whether the other states start to make their investments later, those will start to look closer to the other states. But like I said, the report is available. We can make that available for anybody who'd like to look at it. But that was the explanation that we heard in our committee. But do look forward to studying that closer and seeing what they've got to support it.
Other questions?
David Warren. I want to know more about this capers thing they've started again. Is it any different than last time, or are they just trying to shovel the same stuff?
Want me to go with that? I brought a handy chart. I almost anticipated your question, David. This time the reamortization is a slightly shorter time frame, okay? So last time it was, I think, 15, 20 years, something like that. It ended up being 7.7 billion. This year it's down to, I think, a 15 or 10, and so this blue is the unfunded portion of the state's pension system, the part that's not fully protected. And you see that it goes up and then begins to come down. The blue line is our current trajectory. That's what we're doing now. That's our current plan. And we get down here to a relatively small portion of our CAPER system that's not fully funded by about 2033. The problem is that you got bigger payments in the short term. I'm going to flip this around. Orange is what the governor's proposing. You see that we're unprotected longer and at a higher level on the orange. These are the payments, and I'll pass that around if anybody wants to look at it. The blue line is our current payments. They go up pretty steep and then drop off when we get covered. The orange line shows the governor's plan, lesser payments, and this is why she's doing it, because her budget doesn't balance without that extra money, and it runs it out longer and then balloons out here at the back end, okay? So the back of the napkin example is it's like refinancing your mortgage and cashing out some money right now with a lower payment, and then, yeah, we'll take care of it later, we'll pay it later. Later is your kids and grandkids. It's not you and your golden years. So I think it's a bad idea. It adds 4.4 billion in spending that's not currently accounted for. CAPER's board came out this week and said it was a bad idea. They didn't recommend it. There is a window in every pension system in which you reamortize, because those payments, that blue line, gets to be so big that it breaks your budget. Ours gets to be 1.1 billion on a $7.5 billion budget, okay? That's a lot of money, right? 1/7 of the state's budget to make your pension payment. So they recommend after about 2024, between 2024 and 2027, there'll be a window in which we should reamortize our pension system in order to bring that payment down and take advantage of favorable interest rates, hopefully at that point, and make the state's payment obligation work. But you don't do that until you're past this peak and you're paying down the unfunded liability. Because good business sense says you don't want to pay interest on interest, and you don't want to increase the unfunded portion of your pension. So refinancing now is a bad idea. When it's time, the CAPER's board has full legal authority to reamortize on its own. It doesn't need legislative approval to do it. So anybody telling you, oh, I want the legislature to step in and usurp the CAPER's board and tell it what to do and when to do it, should make you go, there's probably a reason why that's not a good idea.
You know, let's be clear about this. This is politics 101. Last year, she tried the exact same thing and was overridden in a veto override. The legislature said with supermajority, we do not support this effort. We do not support putting us on the hook for more funding with CAPERS down the road. As the representative said, paying interest on interest. It makes no financial sense. So why would she come out this year? Why would she propose doing the exact same thing that got vetoed over last year? You have to ask yourself that. It makes no sense. Well, it comes down to the bottom line. She wanted to be able to say that she turned in a balanced budget. And by doing that, she can say she balanced the budget. That is not good policy. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not good politics. Be straightforward, be open, and don't put our state in jeopardy in years in the future just to get by with what you're doing today.
Yeah, I would add too that it's my understanding that as Representative Finch mentioned, the Capers Board of Trustees decision on that, in their opinion, was unanimous. It does not appear to be a political one. And so while the governor, I think, has had some very good ideas, one of them I was very pleased to see was lifting the moratorium on Osawatomie State Hospital and trying to get that to a point where we can have voluntary admissions again. This reamortization plan is not one of them, which was, as Senator Tyson mentioned, the large consensus of the legislature last year and probably will be again.
Paul Bean. I just wanted to stand and applaud you on the Kansas work plan. I fully am in support of that and excited about that, and thank you for bringing that together. I'm especially interested in the Kansas Promise Act from an economic development standpoint. Our current and existing industry that we have, that's a huge problem, is workforce. It's great to have low unemployment, but they just can't find the workforce. And there's people out there that we need to train and give opportunities to, so I applaud that. And it's also a key piece, as you know, to getting new industry to come. It's a national problem. But if we're showing that we're doing something where other states aren't, then that puts us ahead of some of our competitors. So thank you for working on that.
Thank you. Just a brief word on the Kansas Promise Scholarship component. It is based on a Tennessee plan. Tennessee, like Kansas, is kind of a Republican-dominated legislature, but that had bipartisan support. Tennessee does it for everyone. Kansas cannot afford to do it for everyone. So what we said is if you go into one of these 10 high-need areas in the state, you're willing to commit to that when you come out of high school. You have to apply for your federal aid. You have to apply for all private aid. We'll cover the last dollar to get you through trade school, tech school, or community college if you're going into one of those areas. But you do have to work part-time or do 100 hours of community service a year while you're in school. And you do have to agree to stay in Kansas and work in Kansas for 2 years after graduation, or you have to pay it back. So we believe that it shouldn't just be a handout. It should be something that stimulates people to work, and that it should be a recruitment tool and really more of a workforce development tool than a tuition giveaway. We do allow kids to bridge and go to a Kansas 4-year institution. You know, Kansas is a brain drain state. We have a lot of kids that come to Kansas to get educated and then they leave. And so we want them to stay here. And we want them, if we're going to invest in them and help them be a productive part of our workforce, we want them to stay in Kansas and work here and help businesses to grow and come to Kansas. So we're very excited about that. The Tennessee program has been expanded twice to additional populations of people, and we hope that we're having that conversation in future years about new ways to bring an even greater workforce development component to Kansas, but we're excited about it.
I would just add on this.
What's that?
What's the 10 areas?
We don't set them. The Department of Commerce, in consultation with Kansas Business and Industry, will set those, and they can change annually. So, you know, up 3 weeks ago, we would have told you we need 1,000 new sheet metal workers down at Spirit, and now they've laid off 1,000. So that's a huge swing for that community, but it will come back someday. And so we need to be flexible. And what Paul, I think, could tell you in his role as an economic developer, you don't know what that next business will be, but you want to be able to promise that you can be flexible and attentive to whatever those needs are. We have a huge need for cybersecurity professionals. Cerner up in Kansas City wants to hire a bunch of those folks. So we don't want the legislature picking that. We want the people with boots on the ground to tell us what companies are looking for.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up cybersecurity too. Right now, we are very weak in our education system as far as IT and cybersecurity and other issues like that. So we need the broadband in the state, and we also need the classes available to the students. I go around and tour schools in the district. There's 22 in the Senate district, and a majority of them do not offer any IT courses. And the irony is we could be offering those online. Yeah. So what we need to do is ramp up the interest and the innovation for our students. Those are good paying jobs. They can stay in the community. They can stay local. I know Barton County Community College is starting a cybersecurity program. We lost my nephew to another state because there wasn't cybersecurity available where he's at and where he's going for his degree, and he wanted to stay in Kansas. So, you know, it's a demand. Cerner, other companies, there's companies that are offshoring now to other countries. They would like to bring that development home, and we don't have the resources, we don't have the employees of the skill set to be able to do that, and we absolutely could. These are high school students that could be trained to code, to do networking, to do hardware, and they could hit the ground running. And these companies would be happy with that. It would be a win-win for our state, and I'm going to continue to push that as much as we can. And I know my colleagues are going to help me on that too.
And in an era where we don't have these ever too far away from us, our trade programs right now in our high schools, we've got 5 schools in House District 5. That's one of the things I think we should be most proud of. Adding HVAC, automotive, welding, a lot of those programs are on the rise, and our teachers and instructors are doing an excellent job. They often have a job in addition to coming in and instruct the students. But it's really exciting if you guys get the opportunity to go in and visit. They love having visitors there, but a lot of these young men and women, that's the highlight of their day, is getting to go learn about these things. So when we make it even easier to show how that translates into careers, good jobs, they can stay in our communities, raise families, and something they can really be proud of. I obviously went the other route. I made a bad life choice and went into law school and got away from the farming, but showing them that they should be just as proud, if not more, of being able to work with their hands and build things in our communities, and having that mentality in our schools has been huge, and I'm excited to see it going that route because we're better, stronger when we've got all of those traits. So keeping them in our communities is good for everybody.
Additional questions? All right. Diana's got another one.
If we're looking at creating 10 areas of critical need, and that shifts, like in the case of Spirit Airlines, what happens to those students who've already committed and might be mid-program?
They get to finish. We're not going to pull the rug out from under them.
You know, I'm going to touch on something if there's no questions. We had a comment about K through 12 funding again, and that actually is going to be an issue. I don't know if you guys saw the special, the report by Legislative Post Audit on special needs funding. So we definitely are going to have that before us. And then it was somewhat unprecedented. Usually bill introductions are common courtesy. In the Kansas Senate Education Committee this week, there were 2 bills that were attempted to be introduced, and both of them were rejected. And one of them had to do with $40 million of K through 12 funding that was not allocated because the student population was down. So K through 12 funding is always an issue, and it appears it's going to be on the radar again this session also.
I think I just heard, let the record reflect, the Senate is causing more problems than the House. So, another credit to our House leadership here.
There you go.
Well, I'm going to ask one final question, and then our time will about be up, and I'm interested in each of your perspectives on this. But economic development incentives are always important when we're recruiting people, not only to our community, but region and state, and they're always under the microscope as to their effectiveness. And we have several things available to us in the state of Kansas, and they help us recruit jobs and workforce and new companies. And so maybe you can comment on that. I know it's going to be a topic in this year's legislature, and Commerce is actually doing a statewide study. And so I'm interested in your perspective on that, and what you think we might see this session, and what you support in terms of economic development incentives.
Go ahead.
We've been fortunate in our state. We haven't had as much of the controversy around our economic development programs as some other states have had. You know, Kansas, the big one is the tax abatement for businesses that locate or expand and create a certain number of jobs. The state, I think, wisely leaves a lot of that discretion to local governments to decide what their programs are going to be, and sets a maximum of 10 years. Missouri, by contrast, goes out to 20 years, and that's why we had a lot of the cross-border stuff that was going on in Kansas City, where companies were leapfrogging and taking advantage of the benefits there when they ran out, coming back over here and getting a new deal from Kansas. So we also have HPIP and PEAK, which are kind of payroll incentive programs for employers that they're able to use. Probably for me, the most troubling trend is nothing to do with the government program, but with the idea that companies are increasingly expecting communities to hand them cash because they're coming to town. And we just saw it happen in Topeka with the new Walmart distribution center. Of course, Amazon was the most glaring national example where they had this huge competition for who would host their headquarters to, and wanted big cash payouts to move there and grants of infrastructure and that sort of thing. I don't like that. I don't think that's what government should be doing. And I would like to see us get out of that business, but I understand that it's also an arms race with neighboring states and other places, and if you don't compete, you're going to lose out on those businesses and those jobs. But I think that's going to be a continuing concern as we see cities and counties willing to pay for businesses to come there. I think, obviously the local incentives, TIFs and CIDs and that sort of thing, and then star bonds are the other ones that we see used up in the Legends area up in Wyandotte County. And those tend to be a little controversial. The Johnson County folks don't like that. Some of that's they don't like Wyandotte County having nice things. But some of it is when it's overused and you've got two competing hockey arenas within a few blocks of each other, hockey arenas in Johnson County, Kansas. There are abuses of every system, and we have to be vigilant about having accountability in our incentives because while we want the jobs and we want the businesses, we don't want every other taxpayer to be saddled with additional costs for giveaways.
Yeah, and you mentioned oversight. There isn't much oversight for the economic development plans in Kansas, and I think that's one of the issues. I've seen other states where you actually have to post whether you received an incentive or not, because most of the programs that we do have in Kansas that Representative mentioned are targeted for larger corporations and larger business, larger communities. So we need balance on some of these programs that rural has opportunity for it too. I know one of the programs that I fought hard for was proposed by the previous administration to allow individuals to move in no income tax for 5 years for an incentive to stay in the area. So I tried to get Franklin County in it and wasn't able to, but I did get 4 of my other counties in and expanded it by 40 counties. And I think it showed the data that people don't move here for zero income tax, but it does make them feel good when they get here and more of an incentive to stay. But we do need to look at the balance of those programs. And as I spoke to somebody before the meeting started, we engineer people's behavior by our tax codes and our incentive programs. And we need to realize that, and what outcomes are we looking for? Are we getting the return on investment that we're looking for also? If we're not, then we need to reevaluate the program and look elsewhere. I would say also KDOT started a few programs, Kansas Forward, and I encourage you to get involved with that because it will be it's not going to be a 10-year program, but it's going to be a multi-year program so that we get on the radar. I know 68 is one of the big things, and there's other items too that we need to get with our communities and make sure that we're on KDOT's radar for those programs. The other one is there has been a proposal for the Rural Opportunity Zone, the one with the income tax. It goes away, it sunsets. It was only a 5-year program. And I've heard that the administration is not going to encourage renewing that program. A senator has proposed tweaking it a little, maybe giving it a few more incentives to see if we can get people to move back to Kansas. But I think we need to take care of the people that are here too. Yeah, thank you.
And I'll just add quickly, certainly the monetary incentives and things we can do are important, but perhaps I hear from our local business leaders over and over, in addition to low taxes, but perhaps equally as important is having a qualified, skilled workforce. And so the investments we make in our people, our infrastructure, our parks, quality of life issues, those often attract businesses without the need to offer any. I mean, the incentive is to come here for our workforce, our way of life, and so those things. So making sure we invest in those as well, equally important. So I appreciate the opportunity, and it's a good question.
That brings us to 11 o'clock, which is the time that we generally close our legislative coffees. I do want to thank Representative Samsel, Representative Finch, and Senator Tyson for being here today. Also want to thank AT&T, the American Legion Post 60, Franklin County Farm Bureau Association, and the Ottawa Area Chamber of Commerce Legislative Action Committee for sponsoring today's event. We will have our next legislative copy on Saturday, February 15th in this exact room at 10 a.m. We invite anybody who's listening or watching to please attend. We always want to hear your feedback, and I know the individuals up here certainly want to hear from you. As a takeaway today, I wonder if you might want to answer a simple question for me. What is one thing that you wish somebody would have asked you today in wrapping up?
That's a good question. Probably mental health related issues, because those are so important across the spectrum of our society. That's the one thing I've heard most over and over again, and it still has a stigma, so we don't like talking about it. But there's very encouraging movements from a lot of our youth, but it's affecting our farmers, our veterans, our seniors, our professionals, our working class families. It's across the board. So that one's very important. On the flip side of that, I'm very glad we do not have any KU, K-State related discussions, so we'll keep those off the radar.
Yeah. I'm glad that the moratorium was mentioned, that it could possibly be lifted. I'm sure you've heard of the tragedy of Miss Bennett, and I was told that if the moratorium was not in place, that she actually would have been able to self-admit and been able to be in the hospital. We do have an issue with mental health, the beds availability. We need the moratorium lifted. I've been saying that for years, and hopefully, I'm praying that we keep pressuring, enough of us keep pressuring, that we can actually get that lifted. We need more beds in this area, and we need more beds statewide so that people can receive the services. I've often said this, that with mental health, most families and friends don't have the capacity or the, whether it be through finance or knowledge, to deal with the mental health issues. And we need to address what's going on in our society. I want to put a shout out to representatives also, Representative Finch and Representative Samsel. We do have a good team in Topeka, and we know that we can reach out to each other. We know it's not just, you pass it in the House or the Senate or Republican, Democrat. It's a matter of working together to get the best legislation for the state of Kansas. And I'm very happy to work with these guys. So thank you.
I'd echo all the comments on mental health, and in a more lighthearted tone. I wish somebody would have asked me where I was when the Chiefs won the AFC Championship and going back to the Super Bowl for the first time in 50 years. So, go Chiefs, and we will continue to work for you in Topeka, and reach out, call, email, get in touch. We want to hear from you, and thank you all. It is an honor to serve you in our state's capital.
Great, thank you so much. We'll see you on February 15th. Thank you.